Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into something I think, well, a lot of us experience. That feeling, sometimes just a niggle, that we're not quite being our true selves.
Yeah, and this whole idea was really sparked by a great conversation on Vietcetera's YouTube channel, Banthan Banthan, between Tisimin Neem and Thumin.
It really was insightful.
What stood out to me was this concept they discussed, that maybe the best way to understand who you are is to first look at when you're not being that person.
Spotting the deviations.
Exactly. Recognizing when you're off track from your authentic self.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive, really.
Right.
We want to explore those signs with you, the listener, the things that might signal you're maybe out of sync. And hopefully it gets you thinking about your own journey towards, well, self-discovery.
Sounds good. So where does this usually start, this feeling of not being yourself?
Well, the conversation suggests it often begins really early. You know, those feelings of not being free, like someone else is pulling the strings or setting the course.
Definitely. It seems to take root often in childhood.
Right, that pressure. Maybe to be a certain type of person.
Mm-hmm.
And parental influence, it seems, even when it's totally well-intentioned, is a big factor.
Oh, absolutely. The classic push towards certain careers, doctor, engineer, the stable, respected path, it comes from a good place, usually.
But there's a tension there, isn't there?
A huge tension, because what parents see as best might just not click with who the child actually is, their innate leanings, their whole psychological makeup.
Yeah.
And the talk touched on this idea that kids aren't just mini versions of their parents. They're their own people, part of a bigger picture with unique gifts.
But wanting that approval, that's natural.
So natural, but it can kind of train us, maybe unintentionally, to care more about what others think than what feels right inside. And that pattern, well, it can stick around.
That push to be good or talented. It can make kids, well, hide how they really feel, right? And put on these masks, these roles they think people want to see.
That Vietnamese saying they mentioned, "Etiko sutiche," show the good, hide the bad, that really nails it. This pressure for perfection on the outside.
Yeah, it really does.
And it becomes a habit, doesn't it? Not being truly yourself to avoid judgment, just to fit in, to survive socially.
And those little examples, like the kid choosing pink shoes and getting teased, or the one learning to perform to get praised.
Yeah.
It just shows how it starts so young in ways that seem almost insignificant at the time.
But they lay the foundation, don't they, for what comes later? Because as we try to become independent, new kinds of inauthenticity pop up.
It shifts.
Right. The struggle changes from just dealing with parents to the maybe harder work of figuring out who you want to be.
That whole journey to autonomy, Tasimin Neem's own story, was really something telling his parents quite young, like teenage years,
Yeah.
that he was going to live his own life, make his own choices, even if they didn't approve. That takes guts.
It really does. And it seems like asserting that independence early makes a difference. They contrast people like him with those who stay, well, more dependent.
And those people might find it harder later.
It seems so. Harder to make those big life calls. It's like that muscle for making your own choices hasn't been exercised enough.
Right, it hasn't been developed. And then does that dependence just shift onto someone else? Like a partner, maybe?
That's a really interesting point they raise. It can mirror that earlier dynamic with parents. You sort of trade one dependency for another, which really highlights why that personal struggle, they call it trando, like striving or fighting for your own path, why it's so necessary. It's not about anger, but about actively taking the wheel.
Yeah, claiming it. And Threeman's story, too, about fasting to save up for books she wanted. That quiet defiance.
It shows that inner drive, doesn't it? Pursuing what really matters to you, even when it's tough.
And it makes you wonder, maybe you need some of that challenge. That vadup, as they put it, those bumps in the road.
Perhaps. Maybe navigating those obstacles is actually how you figure out what's genuinely you, how you discover yourself.
Okay, so fast forward to now. We've got this whole other layer, haven't we? Social media. It's different.
It is. It's maybe more subtle, but it's everywhere, affecting how we see ourselves, how we present ourselves.
This idea of fake freedom online really struck me.
Yeah, me too. It looks like freedom, like self-expression, but is it? Or is it more about crafting this perfect image for everyone else?
That constant performance, documenting everything, even lunch. Like we're all reality stars now.
It can feel that way. And that metaphor of wearing borrowed clothes online, projecting an image that isn't really yours, maybe just to fit in or get likes.
It's a different kind of trap than, say, parental control. It feels more internal, like a pressure we put on ourselves.
I think so. And those lyrics they mention, from Le Cat Trong Lee, laughing alone, crying alone.
Oh, that's powerful.
It really captures that potential loneliness, doesn't it? Even when you're supposedly connected to thousands online.
Are you really connecting, though? That quick hit of validation versus, real support from someone who actually knows you. It's not the same.
Not at all. And it raises that big question. Is all this online freedom actually making us feel more alone?
The pandemic seemed to ramp that up, didn't it? People escaping into social media, into gaming.
Definitely. It became a coping mechanism for many. But then you hear stories like Tessie Min Nim's about young people in his community.
Feeling lost.
Yeah, totally lost and disconnected despite being constantly online. They feel this pull to go home, like back to their real selves after living so much online.
That's quite sad.
It is. And it shows how when you're disconnected from yourself, you might end up going down some pretty extreme paths trying to find something, trying to find yourself, maybe.
Like substance abuse, things like that.
Exactly. You become more vulnerable to harmful influences when you're disconnected, both online and offline.
And getting back from that, from being inauthentic for so long, plus dealing with negative stuff, that must be incredibly difficult.
A real challenge. And the feeling it creates might be different too, less like the frustration of being controlled by parents, and more like this, emotional numbness.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Kind of emptiness, maybe.
So the conversation then moves towards, okay, how do we start reclaiming this? How do we understand the roles we inevitably play?
Because society definitely pushes certain roles, certain ideas of success, of being useful.
Absolutely. And that pressure is real. The discussion touches on chasing those external things, the job title, the salary.
We've all been there, probably.
Right. And then realizing maybe that it didn't bring the fulfillment you expected.
So this idea of playing roles.
Yeah.
Lawyer, doctor, even a monastic role.
Yeah, Tuki Min Nim's experiment was fascinating, taking off his robes temporarily just to see how people reacted to him without the role defining him first.
What'd that show him?
It seemed to reinforce that true value isn't in the role, but in the inner stuff: peace, love, wisdom, character, things you can't put on a business card.
Right, those are internal.
And it leads to this understanding that life is a journey. It involves navigating expectations, trying things out, making mistakes, finding your way.
Which brings us to the key question for you, the listener. Do you know where you are on that journey? Are you, right now, living authentically?
And that's often the hardest part, isn't it? Even just recognizing when you're not being true to yourself, facing that inner truth.
It really is. The conversation highlights that finding that truth within yourself is, well, maybe the biggest challenge in healing or changing.
It means being willing to see your own vulnerabilities, your own pain.
And that takes guts. A lot of courage to say, okay, maybe I need help, or just to be brutally honest with yourself.
Absolutely. And honest in a way that doesn't immediately try to slap a positive spin on everything. That idea of positive thinking, sometimes it can actually be a way to avoid feeling what you're really feeling.
Like the fox and the sour grape story, just changing the narrative because the truth is uncomfortable.
Exactly. That kind of mental dishonesty.
So what's the alternative?
Well, this is where mindfulness comes in. The practice of just observing. Observing your thoughts, your feelings, without judging them, without needing to fix them right away.
So recognizing anger or sadness, but not thinking that's me.
Precisely. Seeing them as temporary states, like weather passing through, not as your entire identity.
That detachment, that observation. It sounds like it could take the power out of those negative feelings.
It really can lessen their intensity. And having support helps too, whether it's real friends or even just that compassionate inner voice reminding you that you're more than your mistakes or bad days.
Because we tend to focus on the bad stuff, don't we?
We do. Like that analogy of the white paper with one tiny ink blot.
Yeah.
We stare at the blot and forget about all the clean white space around it. We magnify the negative.
So perspective is key. Believing you can handle these feelings, that they aren't monsters, but something you can work with.
Exactly. Transforming your view of them.
Okay, so this is all great for understanding, but what about like practical steps? What can you actually do?
Well, one piece of advice that came up was about pakasahajada, basically naturalness, ease in how you interact.
Like how the hosts talked with Tessie Min Nim. It felt relaxed, genuine.
Exactly. That authenticity and how you relate to others, it builds real connection. And realizing deeply that what other people think shouldn't define your core self.
Yeah, easier said than done sometimes, but crucial.
It is. And the big takeaway is that this isn't really a destination. Becoming your true self is an ongoing journey, a process.
Always unfolding. So for you listening, here are some things maybe to try, inspired by their conversation. First, can you carve out some quiet time just to reflect? Ask yourself, honestly, am I living authentically right now?
And maybe think about why, if you're not. Is it self-imposed, or is it coming from outside pressure?
Yeah. And try to create little pockets of solitude. Just have a cup of tea quietly, go for a walk in nature, read a book, whatever helps you reconnect with yourself.
It's also helpful to look back at your life. When did you feel most in charge, most autonomous? When did you feel like you lost control?
Maybe even try to ballpark it. What percentage of your life right now feels like you are genuinely in the driver's seat?
And think about those roles we discussed. What roles are you playing? Do they feel like they fit who you really are?
Reflect on times you did feel truly authentic. Who were you with? What were you doing? Especially maybe with loved ones.
And maybe pinpoint when you started feeling less authentic, with yourself or with others. When did that shift happen?
Also, when those tough emotions come up, sadness, anger, whatever, try to remember, they're temporary visitors. They aren't the whole of you. Practice just watching them.
Yeah, and maybe try observing your surroundings more mindfully too. Just noticing sights, sounds. It can help pull you out of being constantly swept away by thoughts or events.
These are really useful practices, I think. Just ways to build that self-awareness muscle.
Definitely. Steps towards living a more authentic life.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, the main thing is probably just to embrace that journey, right? It's a constant process, this aligning with your truest self.
Absolutely. We hope this gives you some food for thought. Take some time, mull it over, see what resonates with your own experience.
And remember, the path towards being more you, it's ultimately a hopeful one. It's about uncovering and living from that genuine core. Thanks for exploring the deep with us.